Guy and Espina, you've got a great panel standing by to take stock of all of this. We look forward to hearing what you're going to tell us.
Yeah, thanks very much, John. Welcome back, viewers and listeners, to the University of Auckland TV studio. With me, Stephen Mills, who is, of course, the Executive Director of UMR, the Chief Pollster for the Labour Party. Welcome to you. Thanks for coming in. Russel Norman, former co-leader of the Green Party, is with us, as is Bridget Morden, who's worked with Cabinet Ministers Hekia Parata and Nikki Kaye, and also campaigned for the Liberal Party in Australia, so knows a thing or two about campaigns. Stephen, if I could start with you. I know that John and Mihi and Jane have been talking a little bit about this too. How much do you read into this? The latest numbers I'm getting, 12.7%, well actually just over 13% as I update my screen now, of the party vote counted. This is a pretty realistic result, is it? And pretty much in line with the polling that you were doing?
Yeah, it's pretty much in line with the polls, so we certainly don't have a systemic polling failure in New Zealand. I think one poll got there by sort of parachuting through the roof at the very last minute, but all basically in the party of those kind of numbers. Yeah, it's sort of interesting. It's actually been moving around quite a bit as we've been watching, but I guess on the left's point of view, the vote for change is the clearly left vote's up about 6 to 7% from where it was in 2014, and if you add in a reasonable slice of New Zealand First, there is a vote for change there, but yeah, still a very strong national vote. And if that gets up about another 1.5%, well then, definitely they're in the box seat. But at the moment, it looks as, the first panel said, Winston Peters' call at the moment. Yeah, very much so. Russel Norman, if I could bring you in as we are looking at how this would translate to seats in the Parliament. If you look at the party seat entitlement column and you go to the two bottom numbers, obviously that big number national, the numbers we're getting at the moment would translate to 58 seats in the Parliament. You add in New Zealand First and there's a very clear government. Do you see other paths to power at this point?
Well, I mean, numerically speaking, you've obviously got a Labour, Green, New Zealand First, 61 votes, which is sufficient for a majority in Parliament. Likewise, you have a National New Zealand First majority, so you've kind of got two options on the table. In special votes in the last three elections, the Nationals lost a seat, the Greens have picked up a seat, at, I think, the last three elections. So, yeah, I mean, numerically there are two governments in the offing. I think that's pretty straightforward at this stage. There's
always been a problem, hasn't there, with Labour and the Greens and New Zealand First in terms of the possibility, and we saw it happen a couple of times, when New Zealand First refused to deal with the Greens. Do you have any insight about whether the Greens might be prepared to take more of a back seat to let Labour and Winston do a deal? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, if you look at, the 96 election, I guess, where the Alliance found itself in a similar position, and it ended up New Zealand First went with National. And then when you look at 2005, at that point, Greens found themselves likewise in a position where they had little option but to support the government, even though they were excluded from it. And, that's an ongoing problem, if you like, or just reality, political reality for the Greens. And obviously, New Zealand First, Winston has been pretty clear in the past that that's how he likes it.
How disappointed will the Greens be at this point? I mean, compared to previous results and compared to where they were at the start of the campaign?
Well, I mean, depends where, I guess, your starting point is. I mean, obviously before the disaster that they had at the beginning of their campaign, I mean, they had a total disaster start to the campaign.
This is the Metiria Turei.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no question that's turned out to be a terrible mistake. And compared to immediately after that, when they were in real trouble of not making 5, I think that they ran a pretty solid campaign, and they'll be pretty pleased that they got over 5 at the end of the day.
Bridget, extraordinary to see National at the thick end of 58 seats on these early numbers and pushing 47% going into a potential fourth term.
I think it would be great to see those results at the end of the night, but we can't get overexcited quite yet. And as we've demonstrated, we might have that kind of result coming through, but it comes down to how we can form government, and that's, there seems to be equal pathways at this stage. So.
And the campaign, it was driven in those last couple of weeks by trying to make people think and pause before they went with this mood for change, right? I mean, that's a charitable way to put it, really, wasn't it?
I think that was the campaign all the way through. I mean, there was a very clear narrative all the way through that it was a steady government that has delivered in the past and will continue to deliver for New Zealanders. Labour, particularly under Cinda, ran a really strong case for change, a vision versus a plan as such. So I don't think the last 2 weeks really changed that narrative at all. I think there was a bit of a perception or a reality for many people in their minds that Jacinda didn't have the facts that they were after in terms of when it came down to what they were looking for.
Well, I don't think National's defence of his record was relevant at all in this campaign. I think it was initially a case for change, and that's when the Labour vote really surged. And then National, with Stephen Joyce's big lie, wrestled the kind of agenda back to economic credibility and then on to tax. And actually, so they made it an election about risk rather than change.
Yeah.
It wasn't an election about National's sound record.
And we'll come back to that because we have the man himself, I think, with John. Stephen Joyce, of course, have run the National campaign, and I think you guys are speaking to him shortly, John.